kept on shrinking the size of that text. I hope y'all can read it. But I got carried away with it, and I wanted to get it all fit in there. So it's a long article, but I was able to fit it in there. But I'm not preaching the material from the bulletin article necessarily this morning. The bulletin article is on the biblical principle of authority, and I will be talking about authority this morning, and this lesson will go somewhat in conjunction with that as giving us a broader understanding of the principle of authority, and more specifically the necessity for biblical authority. You know, I would say that most religious-minded people understand that there is a necessity placed on authority, that you have to have authority for what you do. I know that they in general believe that, because when they tell me things like, well, it doesn't say in the New Testament not to play instruments. And I respond to them by saying something along the lines of, well, it doesn't say in the New Testament not to have biscuits and jelly on the table. I mean, if it's just a matter of preference, wouldn't you prefer biscuits and jelly? See, if it's just a matter of preference of pretty music, and we don't really need to have authority for that, you know, the Bible doesn't say not to, well, then it's okay. It's just a matter of preference. Well, then let's exercise preference, and, you know, I would rather sit in a rocking chair than a pew. So let's tear the pews out and line the auditorium with rocking chairs. See if we're going to start exercising preferences. Now, when I say that, and I say, well, it doesn't say that we can't have biscuits and jelly on the table, so can we have biscuits and jelly on the table? I haven't found anyone yet that says, yeah, go ahead and have biscuits and jelly. Or cornbread and buttermilk. Wouldn't you like to have some cornbread and buttermilk? Some of you say, oh. I'm not real crazy about it, but I know some of y'all are. And they'll say, well, no, we can't do that. Well, why not? It doesn't say not to. See, so they understand the principle of biblical authority insofar as it doesn't interfere with what they want to do. Insofar as the principle of biblical authority doesn't interfere with them doing whatever it is they want to do and call worship to God. Because as soon as you say that something that is done in the denominational world, like the playing of mechanical instruments and music in worship, is not authorized by Scripture, well, then they say, well, it doesn't say not to. Or in some point of lifestyle. And you point out that part of your life is not authorized. In other words, it's wrong. And they say, well, it doesn't say not to do that. Well, it doesn't say not to do a lot of stuff. Can you imagine how big the Bible would have to be? John says that if the Bible were only big enough to contain all of the works of Jesus, then there wouldn't be a book able to contain it all. And that's talking about the things that Jesus did. So, what about all of the things that we're not supposed to do? Can you imagine the size of the book that would be necessary if, in order for God to authorize or to forbid something, He had to specify every single thing that we're not supposed to do and specify every single thing that we are supposed to do? Can you imagine the size of that book? We wouldn't be able to fit it in this building, much less carry it around and store it up in our hearts. And so God created us, rational thinking beings after His own image, so that we could use what God created us with to determine authority or non-authority. And if you read the bulletin article, I'll go through the three ways that the Bible specifically authorizes things, and that is explicit statement, approved example, or necessary inference. Approved example means that it's an example that is approved by Scripture. It can't be, an example of somebody doing something wrong, and you look at that and say, well, there's an example of it in the Bible, so we can do that. Well, there's examples of murder, of rape, of all kinds of evil wickedness in the Bible that are condemned. See, they're not approved. They're condemned. But where we read of examples on the part of the church and what they did in their work and worship to God that is approved by Scripture, well, those are authoritative, approved examples. And we can learn from those examples what we're supposed to do and what we have authority to do as the New Testament church. And then necessary inference. Now, necessary means not that it's inferred. You can read a passage and you can say, well, there's an inference there of this and there's an inference there of that. That doesn't mean that it's necessary inference. A lot of times it's speculation. Necessary inference means that there's no other conclusion you can come to from the passage. For example, in Acts chapter 8, verse 35, when it says that Philip preached Jesus to the Ethiopian eunuch, and that's all it says. It says that he preached Jesus to the Ethiopian eunuch. And in the very next verse, verse 36, the eunuch sees water, and he says, see, here is water. What does hinder me from being baptized? And so, we have the necessary inference, the unavoidable conclusion. There's no other conclusion we can come to from that than the fact that preaching Jesus means teaching people to be baptized in water for the remission of their sins. That's the necessary inference. That's the unavoidable conclusion from that. So we're taught there by necessary inference what we're authorized to preach when we preach Jesus. We're authorized to preach baptism for the remission of sins. Okay? And so we have those levels of specific authority. And most of the time that people try to point out, like they'll say, well, you're not authorized, you don't have authority to use the projector. Where does the Bible say that you can use a projector? Most of the time that people make comments like that, they're referring to explicit statement. They're saying that it doesn't explicitly state that you can do that. Well, they're right, it doesn't. But is there necessary inference? Sure there is. The unavoidable conclusion of Jesus calling a small child to him and using that small child as a visual aid for what he's teaching the disciples, the unavoidable conclusion to that is that the use of visual aids is authorized in preaching. So what am I doing? I'm using a visual aid in preaching. It's authorized. See, but where we don't have specific authority, by one of those three means, by approved example, explicit statement, necessary inference, where we don't have specific authority, sometimes things are authorized on the level of generic authority. And people will say, well, you say that mechanical instruments of music are not authorized because the Bible doesn't say that, or the New Testament doesn't say that you can use them in the worship of the New Testament church. Well, where does the New Testament say that you can use pews? Where does the New Testament say that you can use amplification systems? Where does the New Testament say you can use songbooks? Implying that because we use those things, that we're using things that are not authorized by Scripture. And so they point out things like that to try and show contradictions. Well, are we commanded? Do we have the explicit command to sing congregationally? Yes, we do. Ephesians 5:19, Colossians 3:16. So, if we're commanded to sing congregationally, and Scripture says explicitly that all things in our worship service are to be done decently and in order, 1 Corinthians chapter 14, then we know that we're authorized to employ some means of singing congregationally, decently, and in order. 1 Corinthians chapter 14 explicitly says that it would be wrong for some people to be over here singing one thing and some people over here to be singing something else and some people over there to be singing something else and us all to be singing chaotically. We're supposed to all sing congregationally together. So the songbooks are authorized by generic authority because the specific authority